Good Friday morning of the first week of Lent. And the reading today is excellent from Ezekiel. And you can see the emphasis in this reading on the centrality and importance of choice. We're not ever condemned by who we are or what we are, but what we choose. And the same with redemption. I mean, we're redeemed by what we choose, and we're condemned by what we choose. See, well, I'll read it to you. I'll show it to you. He says, "Thus says the Lord God, if the wicked man," that's the bad guy, "turns away from all the sins he committed, and if he keeps all my statutes and does what is right and just, he shall surely live, he shall not die. None of the crimes he committed shall be remembered against him. He shall live because of the virtue he has practiced. Do I indeed derive any pleasure from the death of the wicked, says the Lord God? Do I not rather rejoice when he turns from his evil way, that he may live?" But then the other side of it is, "And if the virtuous man turns from the path of virtue to do evil, the same kind of abominable thing that the wicked man does, can he do this and still live? None of his virtuous deeds shall be remembered, because he has broken faith and committed sin. Because of this he shall die. You say the Lord's way is not fair. Hear now, house of Israel. Is it my way that's unfair, or rather are not your ways unfair? When someone virtuous turns away from virtue to commit iniquity and dies, it is because of the iniquity he committed that he must die. But if the wicked, turning from the wickedness he's committed, does what is right and just, he shall preserve his life. Since he has turned away from all the sins that he committed, he shall surely live, he shall not die." That's neat, isn't it? See, everything rises and falls on our choices. Whether we choose. See, what do we choose and how do we choose it? See, let me put it this way here for myself. I think one of the great solaces in my life, if that's the right word, consolations, whatever, is when I've seen people estranged from the faith come back to it. Or I see people whose lives are really, really sad lives. Lives of this, you may even say infidelity, lives of, you could use the broad term of sin, seek redemption. They seek to recover. And I think that's got to be the best thing in the world. I have to say, I think one of the neat things about retreat work, when I was in it many, many years ago, was every so often you would see that conversional moment when someone would come on retreat precisely to recover their lives. And I think that's the guys who talk about that, the guys who preach missions, very often mission preaching appeals to those who are disenfranchised by their own doing, and they find their way back to the faith and the divine mercy. See, I take this whole business very seriously. Not presumptuous, just because you've lived a relatively faithful life and all the rest. Don't presume on it. You still have to remain faithful, actively faithful. See? Because you can sin at the end. It's tragic, but you still have the power to reject. At the same time, a lifetime of sin, there can be a graced moment. Look at the New Testament readings, the graced moment in which a person sees the light and responds to that light and is converted, as it were, from a treacherous way of life to a holistic way of life, to a good and holy way of life. I think that is the great story of grace. God does not will the damnation and the death of the sinner. He seeks only life. He came to give us, Christ said, "I came to give life and give it in abundance." But he can't give what you won't take. You can't give a gift if it's a gift of life if you reject it. See? If you rather take the path you're on. I think of God as a tragic God in so many ways, that he loves so much and he's so forgiving, and yet there are those who refuse to be forgiven. They refuse to turn around. I think of some of the vile characters of history. Did they ever think of asking for forgiveness? I think of Hitler in the bunker, and he blew his own brains out. I guess rather than get captured by the Russians. I don't know. Talk about a morally tragic figure. It's somebody who is the incarnation, as it were, of evil. And I wondered, he was a Catholic. Did he reject the faith? How did he reject it? Did he ever have moments of grace where he could have converted? Who knows? Only God knows. I don't know what happened to Hitler. But he's the epitome he's the epitome of the rejection of Christian charity. He was an abomination, a moral abomination. And you see, he had to have chosen it. He had to have chosen it. And those who followed him fanatically chose it. Okay? I don't know. But I do know that choice matters. I don't want to sound like a cliche, but it does matter what we choose and how we shape our lives by our choices. And always grateful for grace that assists us in our choices and not presumptuous. The worst thing is presumption. I think it's worse than actual sin. Sin can be an actual source of grace. In this sense, you realize you're really fouled up. Sometimes the enemy of holiness is mediocrity, not sin, mediocrity. Doing the minimum, keeping your nose clean and your mouth shut, as opposed to doing what is really good and important. What kills a marriage is very rarely infidelity, but the lack of active fidelity toward one's spouse. You start taking each other for granted. You forget. I don't know how else to put it. You get so used to each other that you no longer seek to be active friends together. You don't actively seek the good of the other. Actively. Passively, yes, but actively. I always think of that when you see people who have been married 20 or 30 years and sometimes how a third party comes into the picture. Maybe because that third party finally sees you, sees a person. Instead of taking them for granted, they see them. And that is powerful. Okay? From being taken for granted to being cherished. See? I think the enemy of excellence is not evil, but mediocrity. If you're steeped in evil, you know you are. And you have a chance to be redeemed because you're not satisfied with what you are. You know that you have fouled up. And hence, you are in need of salvation, redemption, rebuilding of one's life. But if you live in a nice, good old mediocre existence, you can be complacent. And you're not going to commit sin, but you're never going to achieve excellence either. You're satisfied being a C student. You have to tell you the truth. That was me in high school. I was satisfied if I just passed the course. See? Imagine if that's your moral life. You're satisfied by being mediocre, being good enough instead of being excellent. See? We're not called to mediocrity. We're called to excellence. The imitation of Christ is an imitation of a suffering God who loves to the point of suffering for us, you see? Loves us to the point of suffering for us. It's the model of love. It's a model of human excellence, you see? It's very important. Sin is not the enemy of holiness. Complacency is. Mediocrity. It's the real enemy. Because you don't know you need to be redeemed. You're passively satisfied with nothing, as opposed to be clearly in need of redemption. You take one quick example. An alcoholic, when he hits the bottom, or she knows they need to be redeemed, that's a grace moment. Ask any alcoholic in AA. It's that moment when you know it's either getting help or dying, but you can't stay where you are. That's a grace moment. See? Yeah, that is the truth. Sometimes the worst state is the beginning of the better state and then the best state. In between, forget it.